Time of death, 2:14 a.m. Dr. Alastair Finch's voice was cold, cutting through the silence of the delivery suite. His perfect career was shattered. On the sterile table, the heir to a billion-dollar fortune lay motionless, blue, and silent. Head nurse Evelyn Reed turned to the rookie, Clara May, with a venomous sneer. "Don't just stand there gawking, girl. It's over." To the room full of defeated experts, Clara was an insignificant ghost in cheap sneakers, too simple to grasp the tragedy. But as the world-renowned doctor turned his back, surrendering to failure, he didn't see the quiet defiance in the rookie's eyes. He didn't see her step forward, ignoring his final command, her hands reaching for the lifeless child with an ancient purpose. They had all declared an end to a life. They were about to witness a miracle that would challenge everything they knew. The silence that followed Dr. Finch's declaration was heavier than any sound. It was a dense, crushing void, broken only by the soft, final chime of the heart monitor as it was switched off. The vibrant green line, which the entire room had been praying would spike, flattened into an unwavering, indifferent horizon. Death was a flat line. It was the clinical silence in a room filled with the most advanced life-giving technology money could buy. Gleaming chrome carts stood uselessly. Multi-million-dollar screens now displayed only failure. In the corner of the room, a muffled, guttural sob escaped from the mother, Mrs. Sterling, a sound of pure agony that the sterile, white walls seemed to absorb without a trace of sympathy. Standing beside her, a monolith of tailored gray silk, was her husband, Marcus Sterling. He was a man whose face was more familiar from the covers of business magazines than from any family photo album, a titan of industry accustomed to bending the world to his will. His grief was not soft, it was crystallizing into something sharp and cold. He turned his gaze from his wife's broken form to Dr. Finch, and his eyes were not filled with tears, but with the icy fury of a king whose command had been disobeyed. "What happened?" Sterling's voice was low, but it carried the weight of collapsing markets and shattered contracts. It was a voice that didn't ask questions, but demanded answers. "You stood in my office. You looked me in the eye and guaranteed perfection. You spoke of technology, of precision. This is not perfection, Doctor." Dr. Alastair Finch flinched. The sweat on his brow suddenly felt cold. He was a god within these walls, his reputation as immaculate as the polished floors. Now, under Sterling's accusing gaze, his divine authority was crumbling. He drew himself up, his voice regaining its practiced, condescending calm. He began to weave a shield of complex medical jargon, a language designed to mystify and intimidate. "It was an unforeseeable, fulminant cardiogenic collapse, Mr. Sterling. A 1 in a million anomaly. The fetal heart rate was stable until the final moment. There was no warning. We did everything humanly and technologically possible." His eyes scanned the room, a subtle, desperate search for something, anything, to deflect the weight of the billionaire's rage. Head nurse Evelyn Reed, ever the loyal soldier, stepped in to restore order, her voice a sharp instrument in the suffocating silence. Her own reputation was tied to Finch's, and her expression was a mask of grim efficiency. "Bereavement cart to delivery suite 1, she barked into her comms device. "Notify the morgue. Page the hospital chaplain." Each command was a brick being laid, walling off the tragedy behind a fortress of procedure. This was no longer a matter of medicine, it was a matter of damage control. Her sharp eyes then landed on Clara May, who was standing near the wall, motionless. While everyone else in the room was a blur of frantic procedure or frozen grief, Clara was simply watching. Specifically, she was watching the baby. Her gaze was fixed on the tiny, still form on the resuscitation warmer. Nurse Reed's irritation, always simmering just below the surface when it came to Clara, began to boil. The rookie's stillness felt like an accusation. Clara wasn't seeing a deceased infant or a failed procedure. She wasn't thinking about lawsuits or reputations. She was looking at a perfectly formed child. She saw the delicate swirl of dark hair plastered to his head, the impossibly tiny fingernails, the curve of a cheek that would never feel a mother's kiss. And in that profound stillness, she felt a deep, resonant wrongness. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a pause. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, a warm, steady whisper from a world away. Some souls are just shy, little bird. They stand at the door but are afraid to walk in. You must be gentle and firm and show them the way. Driven by that whisper, Clara took a single, deliberate step away from the wall, toward the resuscitation warmer. In the hypertense atmosphere, the small movement was like a tectonic shift. Nurse Reed was on her in an instant, her body physically blocking Clara's path. "And where do you think you're going?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous to keep it from the Sterling's ears. She grabbed Clara's arm, her fingers digging into the muscle like talons. "I gave you an order. Prepare the bereavement cart. Now is not the time for a rookie meltdown. Get a grip on yourself and do as you are told." The humiliation was sharp and immediate, a clear message to the entire staff: this girl is nothing. Dr. Finch noticed the quiet confrontation, grateful for the distraction from Marcus Sterling's unwavering stare. He strode over, reinforcing his head nurse's authority with a wave of theatrical condescension. "Nurse Reed is correct, May," he said, not even bothering to look at Clara, instead addressing a point on the wall just above her head. "This area is now a sterile field pending post-mortem review. Your services are no longer required here. Go." He dismissed her with a flick of his wrist, the exact same gesture he'd used to shoo a stray cat from his porch. The other nurses and technicians in the room averted their eyes. Some felt a flicker of pity, but most felt relief that the doctor's fire was aimed at someone else, especially someone so insignificant. Clara barely felt the grip on her arm. Her eyes had not left the baby. "Doctor," she said, her voice a fragile whisper that seemed to cost her all the air in her lungs. "Please. Just one more minute. I see something." She didn't know what she saw. A twitch? A shadow? A feeling? It didn't matter. She just knew it wasn't over. Her plea, however quiet, was an act of rebellion. And Dr. Finch, a man whose authority had never been questioned, especially not by a trainee in worn-out sneakers, finally turned his full attention to her. His face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into a cold, terrifying rage. "You see something?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "You, a novice who fumbles with 4 lines, are telling me you see something that my entire team, with a century of combined experience and the most advanced diagnostic equipment in the world, has missed?" He took a step closer, invading her space, his voice dropping even lower. "I have pronounced the time of death. That is a final, medical, and legal declaration. Are you questioning my judgment, Nurse May?" The room went absolutely still. This was no longer about a tragedy. It was a challenge. And in Dr. Finch's kingdom, challengers were not tolerated. They were crushed. Clara felt Dr. Finch's words like a physical blow, each one laced with a venom that made her shrink back. Nurse Reed's grip on her arm tightened, a cruel, proprietary gesture that said, "I own you, I control you." The other staff in the room suddenly found the polished linoleum floor fascinating, their gazes fixed downward, desperate to avoid the crossfire. Marcus Sterling watched the scene unfold with the cold, unnerving curiosity of a man observing an insect caught in a spider's web. He was detached from the hospital drama, lost in a private world of grief and rage. But something inside Clara, a deep, resilient core she didn't know she possessed, refused to break. With a strength that surprised even herself, she pulled her arm free from Nurse Reed's grasp. The sudden movement made the head nurse stumble back a step, her face flashing with shock and indignation. "I am not questioning your authority, Doctor," Clara said, her voice shaking but finding a new, clear resonance in the silent room. She wasn't begging anymore. She was pleading a case. "I am asking for his." She pointed a trembling finger toward the baby. "His color, the lividity hasn't fully set in. There's still elasticity. My grandmother was a midwife for 50 years. She taught me." Dr. Finch cut her off with a sharp, incredulous laugh. It was a terrible sound, utterly devoid of humor and filled with derision. "Your grandmother?" he barked, turning to the other doctors as if to share a joke. Are you hearing this? We are in a $100 million state-of-the-art medical center, and Nurse May wishes to consult rural folklore. He wheeled back to face her, his eyes glinting with a savage, dismissive light. And what precisely did your grandmother teach you, May? To burn sage? To whisper an incantation? Tell me, I'm fascinated. A few of the younger residents, eager to align themselves with their chief, let out nervous, obsequious chuckles. The sound of their laughter in a room with a dead child was grotesque. She's hysterical, Doctor, Nurse Reed chimed in, stepping forward to reassert control. She placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, her voice dripping with a false, saccharine pity that was more insulting than any shout. Clara, dear, you're clearly overwrought. The stress of the situation is too much for a trainee. Why don't we get you some water and let you sit down before you embarrass yourself any further? She began to gently but firmly push Clara toward the door, a clear attempt to physically remove the problem while painting her as a fragile, emotional wreck. Clara resisted, planting her worn-out sneakers on the floor. No. Please, just listen. Let her. The two words, spoken with the chilling finality of a judge's sentence, silenced the entire room. Every head snapped toward Marcus Sterling. He hadn't moved, but his presence now dominated the space entirely. Dr. Finch was the king of this room, but Sterling was the king of the world that owned it. Mr. Sterling? Finch asked, his voice suddenly losing its arrogant edge. Sterling's deadened eyes were fixed on Clara. There was no hope in his gaze, only a vast, empty abyss. You, he said, his voice a low growl aimed at Finch, with your guarantees and your technology, have failed. My son is gone. My wife is broken. Your reputation is meaningless to me now. He then shifted his crushing attention to Clara, his expression a mask of utter contempt. You think you can do something? You, with your grandmother's stories? He gave a bitter, humorless smile. Fine. You have 60 seconds. The air in the room crackled. Dr. Finch and Nurse Reed stared, horrified. This wasn't a chance, it was a gladiatorial execution. When that clock hits 1 minute, Sterling continued, his voice lethally calm, and you have accomplished nothing but disturbing my son's peace with your peasant theatrics. I will personally ensure that your nursing license is revoked and you are blacklisted from every medical institution in this country. You will never work again. It was the ultimate challenge, a trap designed for her complete and utter destruction. There was no winning. There was only the degree of her failure. Dr. Finch, unable to defy a man of Sterling's power, gave a curt, reluctant nod. 60 seconds, he confirmed, glancing at the large digital wall clock. He folded his arms across his chest, his posture radiating smug certainty. This would be over soon. Nurse Reed's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. She was about to watch the final, pathetic implosion of the rookie she so despised. The world dissolved for Clara. The threats, the smirks, the suffocating pressure, it all faded into a dull roar. The only things that existed were the still, silent child on the warmer and the glowing red numbers on the wall clock. 60 seconds. She rushed forward. Her movements, once so hesitant, were now sharp with desperate purpose. She ignored the box of sterile gloves, tearing them aside. She needed to feel. She placed her bare, warm hands on the baby's cold chest, a stark contrast of life and its absence. She closed her eyes, shutting out the 14 pairs of hostile, disbelieving eyes that were watching her, waiting for her to fail. The first second ticked by on the clock. The sound was deafening, a hammer blow marking the start of her countdown. 59. 58. 57. The room held its breath. The countdown to her miracle, or her absolute ruin, had begun. Hey, before that clock hits 0 and Clara's fate is sealed, can you do me a quick favor? If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had a hidden strength that nobody else could see, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community that believes in the power of the underdog. Your click helps us share more stories about quiet heroes who change the world in a single moment. Thank you. Now, let's see if a miracle is possible. 56. 55. 54. The ticking of the clock was the only sound in the universe. Each second was a hammer blow, chipping away at the impossible hope Clara clung to. The air was thick with hostility. Dr. Finch stared, his arms crossed, a condescending smirk fixed on his face. Nurse Reed stood nearby, poised like a vulture, ready to swoop in and drag Clara away the moment the countdown ended. And Marcus Sterling watched with those chillingly empty eyes, a man merely waiting for a foregone conclusion. Their collective disbelief was a physical force, pressing down on Clara, trying to smother the tiny ember of defiance she held. Clara shut them out. She closed her eyes, and the sterile, white delivery suite dissolved. The beeping machines, the glint of chrome, the judgmental faces, they all faded into a quiet hum. In her mind, she was in her grandmother's small, sunlit kitchen, the air smelling of dried herbs and wood smoke. She could feel the warmth of the old woman's hands guiding hers on a small, cloth doll. "The world will tell you to be rough, little bird," her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "They will tell you to shock into force. But life is not a machine to be kickstarted. It is a shy guest. You must invite it in gently." Her breathing deepened, falling into a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Her hands, which had been trembling, became steady. She began. It was nothing like the violent, mechanical process of modern resuscitation. There were no cracked ribs, no forceful pumps. This was something else entirely. Her fingertips, exquisitely sensitive, began to apply a soft, rhythmic pressure to the baby's tiny, still chest. It was a pattern, a delicate dance. 1, 2, 3, 4 taps over the heart, then a gentle sweep up the sternum. Her thumbs found a specific point at the base of the baby's skull, pressing with a firmness that was precise, not painful. She was listening with her hands, feeling for a resonance, a vibration, a whisper of potential that no machine could ever detect. "What in God's name is she doing?" Nurse Reed muttered to Dr. Finch, her voice dripping with scorn. "This is a circus." 30 seconds left. "Sterling is going to sue this hospital into oblivion." "Let her," Finch murmured back, his eyes cold and calculating. "This is a gift. She's insubordinate, hysterical, and practicing some kind of voodoo. Document every second of this, Evelyn. Her meltdown will be the cornerstone of our defense. We were dealing with an unstable employee during a crisis. He wasn't just waiting for her to fail, he was actively building a case against her failure. But not everyone was watching with contempt." Standing quietly near the door was Dr. Ishan Sharma, a visiting pediatric cardiologist from a renowned research institute in London. He had been invited to observe Dr. Finch's much-lauded flawless delivery protocols. Now, he was witnessing something far more compelling. He watched Clara, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He saw the focused calm on her face, the absolute precision in her seemingly random movements. "That's not standard neonatal resuscitation protocol," he whispered to the resident standing beside him, a young man who was pale with terror. "But it's not random either. Look." Dr. Sharma pointed subtly. Her pressure points on the chest and back, they aligned almost perfectly with the parasympathetic nerve ganglia. And the rhythm, it's methodical. He looked on, fascinated. It's as if she's trying to reboot the autonomic nervous system directly, bypassing the conscious brain entirely. It's brilliant, in a way. Where could she have possibly learned that? The resident just shrugged, too terrified to speak. Dr. Sharma was seeing a profound method in what Finch and Reed had dismissed as madness. 20. 19. 18. The baby remained a pale, bluish-gray. Still. Silent. 15. 14. 13. A junior nurse in the corner turned away, her hand covering her mouth. She couldn't watch the final, crushing moment of failure. 10. 9. 8. Finch shot a glance at Marcus Sterling, a silent, smug message of "I told you so" already prepared. Nurse Reed took a half step forward, flexing her fingers, ready to grab Clara. 7, 6, 5. Clara was drenched in a cold sweat, her entire being focused into the points of her fingertips. The world was gone. Her grandmother was gone. There was only the child and a rapidly closing door. She leaned down, her lips hovering just over the baby's, and she didn't force air in. She breathed out a long, slow, warm sigh, a gentle, sustained whisper of life. Come now, she thought, pouring all her will into that single breath. It's safe here. You can come in now. 4, 3. She pulled back. Her finger rested lightly on the baby's sternum. For a heart-stopping moment, there was still nothing. Despair, cold and sharp, pierced through her focus. It was over. She had failed. Then, she felt it. A flutter. It was impossibly faint, a butterfly's wing beat beneath her skin, so slight she thought she had imagined it. But then her eyes, wide and desperate, saw it. The tiniest, most insignificant spasm in the baby's left nostril. A single, minuscule flare. The clock on the wall glowed with a single, brutal number. 2. The room saw nothing. Finch was already turning away in disgust. But Clara's eyes, which had been filled with the dullness of despair, suddenly flew open, ignited with a wild, brilliant, impossible spark of hope. 1, 0. The digital clock on the wall displayed the brutal, final 0. The 60 seconds were gone. Time's up, May. It's over, Nurse Reed snarled, her voice a mixture of relief and triumph. She lunged forward, her hand clamping down on Clara's shoulder to physically drag her away from the table. You're finished. No. The word was not a whisper. It was a raw, commanding cry that ripped through the room, stunning everyone into silence. It was a voice no one knew Clara possessed. Look, she yelled, pointing with a trembling hand. As if on cue, the baby's eyelids flickered. This was not a faint twitch, it was a definite, undeniable movement. Nurse Reed froze mid-pull, her manicured fingers still digging into Clara's uniform, her eyes wide with shock. Dr. Finch, who had already turned his back in disgust, whipped his head around, his face a mask of pure confusion. What is that? He stammered, his mind scrambling for a logical, medical explanation. A post-mortem nerve reaction? A spinal reflex? He was talking to himself, trying desperately to fit an impossible reality into the neat, orderly boxes of his knowledge. But it was too late for rationalizations. A profound and miraculous transformation was taking place. The baby's skin, which had been the horrifying, waxy blue-gray of death, began to change. A faint, rosy blush appeared in the center of the tiny chest, a sunrise spreading outward, chasing the shadows of death from the limbs. The blush deepened, turning from pale pink to a healthy, vibrant rose. The tiny chest, which had been so horrifyingly still, stuttered. It lifted once, then fell. Then it lifted again, a frail, hesitant, uncoordinated movement. It was a struggle, a tiny engine fighting to turn over against impossible odds. Dr. Sharma surged forward, his professional calm completely shattered, his face alight with pure, unadulterated awe. That is not a reflex, doctor, he called out, his voice cutting through the stunned paralysis of the room. That is a synchronized myocardial contraction. She restarted his heart. My God, woman, you actually restarted his heart. He turned on the other staff, who were standing like statues, their mouths agape. Don't just stand there. This child is alive, he roared, his voice cracking with emotion. Give me a neonatal stethoscope. I need low-flow oxygen and a warming blanket. Move. The authority in his voice, the voice of a true expert witnessing the impossible, was absolute. It broke the spell. Nurses who had been paralyzed by Finch's arrogance now scrambled for equipment, their movements clumsy with shock but driven by a new, desperate purpose. Dr. Finch remained frozen. He was a statue of shattered pride. His world, a carefully constructed edifice of procedure, technology, and his own infallibility, was being dismantled before his very eyes. He stared at the struggling infant, then at the rookie nurse in her cheap sneakers, and his expression was one of abject horror. He hadn't just been proven wrong, the very foundations of his medical universe had been proven irrelevant. He was no longer in command. Then came the sound. The baby's tiny mouth, once a slack, lifeless O, pulled open. A small, wet, hitching gasp broke the silence. It was the sound of a lock rusting open, of a forgotten pathway being cleared. It was the sound of a life arriving impossibly late, but arriving all the same. That single, sputtering gasp did what an army could not. It broke Marcus Sterling. The titan of industry, the man of iron and will, visibly crumpled. His knees buckled, and he stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of his wife's bed. His hand, which had signed deals worth billions, reached out, trembling, as if to touch a mirage. "My son," he whispered, the two words a shard of broken glass in his throat. A single tear carved a path through the cold mask of his face. On the bed, Mrs. Sterling lifted her head, her face a mess of tears and mascara, her eyes stretching wide with a hope so fierce it was painful to behold. Clara, her focus absolute, watched the baby's struggling breaths. She knew what he needed. With a gentleness that defied the urgency of the moment, she slid a hand under his back and gave a soft, rhythmic pat. The hitching gasp caught. It held for a moment, gathering strength, pulling in all the hope and disbelief in the room. And then it erupted. A cry. It wasn't a weak, mewling sound. It was a full-throated, furious, magnificent wail. It was the sound of a life that had been lost and was now furiously, defiantly, reclaiming its existence. The cry blasted through the sterile suite, shattering the last vestiges of doubt, washing over the gleaming chrome and the stunned faces. It was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. It was the sound of a miracle. The baby's cry was a relentless, beautiful storm. It was the sound of victory, and it washed over the delivery suite, cleansing the air of despair. The medical staff, shaken from their stupor, became a whirlwind of focused, professional activity. But they no longer looked to Dr. Finch for direction. Their eyes were all on Dr. Sharma, the visiting expert who had recognized the miracle while their own chief had been blind to it. "Heart rate is 140 and steady," a nurse called out, her voice filled with disbelief. "Oxygen saturation is 98% on room air," another added, tears streaming down her face. Each new vital sign, each perfect number displayed on the monitors that had so recently declared failure, was another nail in the coffin of Dr. Finch's authority. He stood rooted to the spot, his face the color of ash. He watched his own team, the staff he had trained and terrorized into submission, completely ignore him. He was a ghost in his own operating room. Dr. Sharma finished his examination, listening intently to the baby's chest with his stethoscope. A slow, wondrous smile spread across his face. He pulled the earpieces out and looked up, his gaze sweeping over the stunned staff before finally landing, with pointed significance, on Dr. Finch. "He's perfect," Dr. Sharma announced, his voice ringing with a clarity that commanded the entire room's attention. "The lungs are perfectly clear. The heartbeat is strong and regular. There are no audible signs of hypoxia-induced stress or neurological impairment." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "This wasn't just a successful resuscitation against impossible odds, Doctor. This was a complete, instantaneous reversal of the cellular death process. I've read about it in theoretical journals, but I've never seen it. In 30 years of pediatric cardiology, I have never seen anything like this." He then turned his gaze to Clara, and his expression was one of profound, unadulterated respect. "Frankly, I don't believe any of us have. This final, irrefutable validation from a world-renowned specialist was the killing blow. If Dr. Finch was a ghost, Nurse Reed was a statue carved from pure fury. Her face, once a mask of smug control, was now a twisted collage of shock, jealousy, and a humiliation so deep it was terrifying to behold. She stared at Clara, not as a subordinate, but as a mortal enemy, a witch who had used some dark magic to so thoroughly and publicly destroy her. The order she had built her entire career upon had been shattered by a quiet girl in cheap shoes, and she would never forgive her for it. Clara, meanwhile, finally allowed her own strength to fail. The adrenaline that had sustained her vanished in a rush, leaving her trembling and lightheaded. She backed away from the table, her legs feeling like water, and leaned heavily against the cool wall for support. She watched the team swaddle the crying infant, her face streaked with tears she hadn't even realized she was crying. There was no look of triumph on her face, no hint of "I told you so." There was only a vast, bone-deep, and overwhelming relief. The organized chaos of the room parted as Marcus Sterling strode forward. He bypassed the scrum of doctors and nurses tending to his son. He bypassed Dr. Finch. He walked directly to the wall where Clara was trying to disappear into the paint. The titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and dictated global markets, stood before the exhausted, trembling rookie nurse. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense. For the first time, he wasn't looking through her, he was truly seeing her. The arrogance, the cold fury, the dead-eyed emptiness, it was all gone, replaced by a raw, humbling, and profound awe. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw working. Finally, he managed to ask a question, his voice thick and rough with unshed tears. "What is your name?" Clara flinched at the direct attention. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Clara May." He nodded slowly, as if engraving the name onto his soul. "Clara May," he repeated softly. He reached into his pocket, and for a tense second, it looked as if he might pull out a checkbook. Instead, he produced a simple, white handkerchief and clumsily wiped at his eyes. "My wife, our family," he began, his voice breaking completely. "We are in your debt for the rest of our days." It was the simplest, most sincere, and most humble statement he had likely ever made. From the bed, a nurse was placing the crying, perfectly healthy baby into Mrs. Sterling's arms. The mother looked over at Clara, her face transformed by tears of joy, and mouthed a silent, perfect, heartfelt, "Thank you." "We need to move him to the NICU for standard observation," Dr. Sharma announced, breaking the spell. "Just as a precaution." As the team began to bustle, preparing the infant for transport, Clara saw her chance. Her part was over. In the renewed flurry of activity, she slid along the wall and slipped quietly out the door. Her exit was noticed by only 3 people: Dr. Sharma, who gave her a deep, knowing nod of immense respect, Marcus Sterling, who watched her go with an expression of unforgettable gratitude, and Nurse Reed, whose eyes burned with a silent, venomous promise of retribution. Clara didn't stop walking. She slipped out of the delivery suite and moved down the brightly lit, sterile hallway, her footsteps silent in her soft-soled shoes. She walked past carts laden with medical supplies, past nurses hurrying on their rounds, past doctors dictating notes into their phones. No one paid her any mind. An hour ago, she was an invisible rookie. Now, after performing a miracle, she was still invisible. And she was grateful for it. She didn't want congratulations or questions. She just wanted silence. She found an empty on-call room at the far end of the floor, a small, windowless space with a lumpy cot and the faint, lingering smell of stale coffee. She closed the door, shutting out the world, and slid down to the floor, her back against the cool wood. The trembling started then, a deep, uncontrollable shudder that racked her entire body. It wasn't adrenaline anymore, it was the sheer, crushing weight of what had just happened. She hadn't been thinking in that room, only acting, guided by a force she didn't understand. Now, the thoughts came flooding in. The baby's still face. The ticking clock. Mr. Sterling's threat. Dr. Finch's cruel laughter. She drew her knees to her chest and finally let out a single, ragged sob, not of sadness, but of a release so profound it felt like a part of her soul was breaking free. But while Clara sought solitude, the story of what she had done refused to be contained. It erupted from Delivery Suite 1 and spread through the veins of St. Jude's International with the speed of a contagion. It started with the junior nurse who had turned away, who now breathlessly told a colleague at the nurse's station, "I saw it." He was gone. Finch called it. And then the new girl. Clara, she just brought him back. The story leaped from floor to floor. At the surgical wing's coffee machine, a resident whispered to a surgeon, "You hear about the Sterling baby? Born dead." Finch was about to call the family, but some rookie nurse started doing this weird folk medicine thing on the kid, and his heart just started beating. The surgeon scoffed, then saw the resident's dead serious expression and fell silent. The narrative took on the quality of a legend. Clara was no longer just a new girl, she was the miracle worker. And with every retelling, the roles of the villains became more sharply defined. I heard Reed tried to physically stop her, one orderly told another. Said she was hysterical. Can you imagine? Finch just stood there, another added. Watched the whole thing happen. Didn't lift a finger until the visiting cardiologist from London took over. When Dr. Finch and Nurse Reed finally emerged from the suite, the world had changed. The air in the hallway was thick with unspoken judgment. As they walked, conversations would abruptly stop, heads would turn, and the staff, who just an hour before would have scattered in fear, now met their gaze with a chilling mixture of contempt, pity, and morbid curiosity. Finch felt his authority, once a heavy cloak of power, evaporate into mist. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a death by 1,000 stares. Nurse Reed, ever the fighter, tried to push back. She saw a young nurse she had personally terrorized for weeks for a minor charting error. Reed shot her a venomous glare, expecting the girl to flinch and look away as she always did. Instead, the young nurse looked directly back at her, her expression unreadable but utterly devoid of fear. In that moment, Reed knew her reign was over. The fear she had cultivated for years was gone, replaced by something far worse, disrespect. Their walk of shame ended at the heavy oak doors of the chief of medicine's office. Dr. Evans, a stern, unflappable man in his late 60s, had been summoned from a dinner party. He had already received 2 calls, one from a bewildered but awestruck Dr. Sharma, and another, far more consequential one, from Marcus Sterling. Dr. Evans's secretary, a woman who had worked there for 30 years, looked at Finch and Reed with an expression of profound disappointment as she waved them into the office. Dr. Evans was standing by his window, looking out at the city lights. He didn't turn around as they entered. "Alistair." "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "Please, sit." They sat. The silence in the opulent office was suffocating. "I received a report from our guest, Dr. Sharma," Evans began, finally turning to face them. His face was grim. "It reads more like something from the New Testament than a post-delivery summary. He seems to believe he witnessed an event that will redefine our understanding of neonatal resuscitation." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Then, I received a call from Marcus Sterling. I was preparing myself for the lawsuit of the century. Instead, he was calm. He was very calm, and very, very clear about what he witnessed in that room." Finch, seeing an opening, leaned forward, his voice a slick bomb of practiced authority. "Robert, it was an unprecedented medical event. A case of profoundly delayed autoresuscitation. I acted according to protocol." "As did I," Reed cut in, her voice sharp. "The nurse, May, was a danger to herself and the integrity of the sterile field. She was insubordinate, she was hysterical, and she broke every rule in the book. She is a lawsuit waiting to happen, not a hero." Dr. Evans listened patiently, his fingers steepled under his chin. When they were finished, he let the silence stretch for a few more agonizing seconds. Then he leaned forward, a look of cold fury in his eyes. "Protocol?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously low level. "Let's talk about protocol, shall we? Mr. Sterling, as you may not know, has a personal policy. For security and liability reasons, his private detail makes a full, high-fidelity audio recording of every significant interaction." The color drained from Finch's and Reed's faces. "I have a copy of that recording," Dr. Evans continued, his voice like ice. "I have you, Evelyn, telling Nurse May she's an embarrassment. I have you, Alistair, mocking her about her grandmother's folk remedies. He leaned in further, his voice barely a whisper. "And I have your official, final declaration of the time of death, followed by 60 seconds of you and your staff standing by to watch a hysterical girl perform a miracle. It's all right here." He tapped a small, digital recorder on his desk. Every last, damning word. The silence in Dr. Evans's office was absolute. The small digital recorder on his desk seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, an unblinking witness to their downfall. Dr. Finch stared at it, his face a ghastly shade of white. The complex medical terms, the years of cultivated arrogance, the impenetrable shield of his reputation, all of it was gone, stripped away by a simple audio file. Nurse Reed, for the first time in her life, looked truly broken. The fight had gone out of her, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell. Dr. Evans leaned back in his chair, his expression devoid of any triumph. He looked weary. "You have both dedicated years to this hospital," he said, his voice softer now, but no less final. "And for that, I will give you a choice. You can both tender your resignations, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. In return, the hospital will not contest your licenses with the medical board, and this recording will be permanently erased. Or, you can refuse, and I will terminate you both for gross negligence, malpractice, and conduct unbecoming of a medical professional. And I will personally hand-deliver this recording to the head of the state licensing board. The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes." There was no choice to be made. It was the illusion of a final, small mercy that did little to soften the brutal reality. Their careers at St. Jude's, their status, their power, it was all over. An hour later, Dr. Evans, accompanied by Dr. Sharma, found Clara in the small, quiet on-call room. She was sitting on the edge of the cot, her hands clasped in her lap, looking small and exhausted. When the two distinguished doctors entered, she shot to her feet, her face paling, assuming the summons was for her termination. "Clara," Dr. Evans began, his voice gentle. "Please, sit. You're not in any trouble." She sank back onto the cot, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Dr. Finch and Nurse Reed have resigned, effective immediately," he stated simply. "And I have just come from a board meeting. They were unanimous. On the strong recommendation of Dr. Sharma, and a rather insistent one from Mr. Marcus Sterling, we would like to offer you a new position." He took a breath. "Head of Neonatal Nursing Education. We will also provide a full scholarship for you to pursue any advanced degree or certification you desire at any university in the world, along with a salary that reflects your new seniority." Clara stared at him, her mind unable to process the words. Head of a department? Scholarships? It felt like a dream, a world she didn't belong in. She looked from Dr. Evans's expectant face to Dr. Sharma's warm, encouraging smile. She should have been ecstatic. Instead, a quiet sadness settled in her heart. They still didn't understand. She shook her head softly. "Thank you, sir. It's more than I could ever imagine. But I have to say no." Dr. Evans looked baffled. "No? May I ask why?" "Because what I did in there," Clara said, her voice finding its steady, quiet strength, it had nothing to do with a title or a degree. It wasn't a procedure I can teach from a textbook. It was about listening. It was about paying attention when the machine stopped telling you what you want to hear. She looked down at her hands. "I'm a nurse. I belong with the patients. If I'm in an office, managing staff, I'll lose the one thing that makes me useful." She looked up, a hint of a plea in her eyes. "If Mr. Sterling really wants to do something, ask him to fund a training program. Not for me. For all the nurses. A program that teaches observation, intuition, the human side of medicine. That's a legacy that would matter." 1 month later, a small, tasteful brass plaque was installed in the lobby of the Serafina wing. It read, "The May Center for Intuitive Nursing Care, endowed by the Sterling family." Dr. Alastair Finch now worked from a gray cubicle in the sterile, beige offices of a massive health insurance corporation. He spent his days on the phone, using his vast medical knowledge to deny coverage for expensive procedures, his voice a monotone drone of corporate policy. The god of the operating room had become a bureaucrat in a call center. Evelyn Reed had taken a position as the night shift supervisor at an underfunded, overwhelmed county hospital 300 miles away. Her sharp voice and rigid adherence to protocol were met not with fear, but with the weary exhaustion of overworked nurses who had seen it all. Her power had been based on the pristine, fragile ecosystem of St. Jude's. Out here, in the real world, she was just another tired woman shouting into the wind. The final scene takes place not in the elite Serafina wing, but in the standard, bustling maternity ward of St. Jude's. Clara May, in her simple uniform and worn-out sneakers, was holding a fussy newborn whose monitors all showed perfect vitals. The young mother was beside herself with worry. "I don't understand," the mother fretted. "They say he's fine, but he just won't stop crying." Clara smiled gently, ignoring the frantic green lines on the screen. She shifted the baby onto his stomach, resting him along her forearm, and began to hum a low, soft tune, a wordless lullaby her grandmother had hummed to her decades ago. She swayed gently, her movements rhythmic and calming. Within moments, the baby's frantic cries softened into small whimpers, and then, with a final, contented sigh, he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The mother stared, her eyes wide with awe and brimming with tears of gratitude. How did you do that?" Clara looked up from the sleeping child, her face illuminated by a quiet, profound joy. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you just have to listen to what they're trying to say." She hadn't changed the world. She had simply returned to her own, a world where the measure of a miracle wasn't a single, dramatic event that made headlines, but the small, silent, everyday moments of genuine care. And in that quiet space, she was whole. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't come from a title, a fancy uniform, or the approval of those in power. It comes from a quiet, unbreakable core of knowing who you are and what you're capable of, especially when no one else is watching. Her courage wasn't loud, but it was loud enough to bring a life back into the world. We've all had moments where we felt underestimated or invisible. What is a hidden strength that you possess that might surprise people? Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a community that celebrates the quiet heroes among us. Reading your experiences is the most important part of this channel. If you believe that true worth shines brightest when the world tries to dim it, make sure you hit that follow button for more stories that matter. Thank you for being here.